Welcome to Off the Record with me, Sanny Ntayombya. Every Friday, I bring a brand new perspective to the week's old headlines. So sit back, relax, and let's get that conversation going. But before we do, make sure you hit that follow button. And now, let's get into the very first headline.
Welcome back to Off the Record with me, Sanny Ntayombya. This is 2025, brand new year, lots of thoughts, lots of things to say. I can't wait to see what this year has to bring. But the very first thing that we will unfortunately have to talk about are taxes. More taxes on beer, more taxes on cars, more taxes, more taxes, more taxes. More taxes today, and probably more taxes in the future. That was pretty much the message from the Minister of Finance, Yusuf Murangwa, on Tuesday. I'll be honest, I was of two minds when I heard the news. My first instinct was, why can't the government allow me to keep as much money in my pocket? But after a while, I started thinking. Every 1st of July, Rwanda celebrates its Independence Day. On that day, back in 1962, the Belgian flag was lowered and the flag of a newly independent Republic of Rwanda was raised. However, while politicians like Kayibanda, Gatera, and Bonyumutwa feasted and made merry, figures such as Guy Logiste, Belgium's top colonial official, and André Perraudin, the Archbishop of Kabgayi from 1959 to 1989, continued to pull the strings behind the scenes. What Rwanda gained in 1962 was independence in name only. In reality, the country remained a little more than a Belgio-French protectorate. It's been 63 years since the Belgians handed executive power to local leaders, but the question remains, are we truly free today? Are we an independent nation? For me, the answer is not yet. Why? Because we still cannot make our decisions based entirely on our own terms. There's a saying, who pays the piper calls the tunes. Since 1962, our so-called development partners have been the ones paying the piper. Through the billions of dollars in aid they have provided, they have significantly shaped our reality. And yet, despite their financial assistance, poverty has not been eradicated. Worse still, some donors have actually used their economic leverage either to serve their own interests or simply to remind us who's in charge. They have never hidden their influence. In the early 2000s, it was the development partners who refused to fund the Rwandan government's proposal to build a 5-star hotel to anchor the country's emerging high-end tourism industry. Thankfully, the government secured funding elsewhere and built what is now known as the Serena Hotel. That very hotel, originally called the Kigali Intercontinental, for those who can actually still remember, it became the catalyst for a tourism industry that today generates nearly $700 million every year. Let me be clear. I'm not saying that our donors did not play a crucial role in Rwanda's post-1994 recovery. To deny their contribution would be dishonest. However, nearly 31 years after the genocide and the civil war, Rwanda's current needs are not beyond their financial means. They are simply not in their priorities. Here's what I mean. They are willing, and here I'm talking about the donors, they are willing to fund media workshops, provide basic medicines, build primary school classrooms, and improve access to clean drinking water in rural areas. That is great. They will gladly support basic agricultural projects and malaria prevention efforts, such as, say, distributing mosquito nets. In other words, they will provide just enough to keep us alive. But they will not fund projects that will fundamentally transform Rwanda. They will not finance the construction of the Kigali Arena. They will not invest in the Bugesera Airport. And they will certainly, most certainly, not support Rwanda's Formula One track or its proposed nuclear power generation project. When it comes to life-changing initiatives, those that would propel Rwanda from a developing to a middle income status, we are on our own. And to be honest, I believe that's a good thing. If you truly want something that benefits you, you cannot expect others to provide it for you. A few months ago, I reviewed the latest National Strategy for Transformation, otherwise known as NST2. The document, if you don't know, outlined a radically different Rwanda by 2029. My main question after reading it through from back to front was, how do we pay for all the new roads, hospitals, schools, power stations, and business parks that are in that document? Well, I guess the cabinet resolution of February 10th, followed by the Ministry of Finance's note the next day, provides some answers. The funding for those major infrastructure projects will have to come from our own pockets. Now, will there be a price to pay? Absolutely. Beer and cigarettes will become more expensive. So will mobile phones and laptops. Hybrid cars will no longer be tax exempt, and beauty products will just simply cost more. Gamblers and betting companies will have to surrender a larger part of their winnings. Hotel stays will be more pricey, and airtime costs will rise. There's no denying that those increases will hurt our pockets. But what choices do we have? We can either stay as we are, accepting the status quo and remaining stagnant, or we can strive, struggle, and sacrifice to build something much greater. That's a question we need to figure out. What do we want to do? But let's move on. On January 28th, M23, the armed wing of the Alliance Fleuve Congo AFC, a Congolese movement that's now kind of led by Corneille Nangaa, took over Goma Airport and the Grande Barrière, the main border crossing between the Rwandan town of Rubavu and Goma, the Congolese city of 2 million people. A few days later, they took over Goma completely. Now, despite the international uproar, M23 now controls not just the majority of North Kivu, but has also moved south into South Kivu, a region it did not actually enter even when it took over Goma back in 2012. All of this could have been entirely avoided. When the M23 took up arms in 2022, evading the DRC from Uganda, not Rwanda as some would allege, and then capturing the border town of Bunagana, they requested negotiations with the government. Their demands that the DRC honors its commitments to them, protects the Congolese communities in North Kivu from the FDLR, and facilitates the repatriation of hundreds of thousands of refugees from camps. It does not sound too much of a demand, in my opinion, but instead, the government opted for fighting, labeling the M23 as Rwandans and terrorists. Rather than giving peace a chance, the DRC government chose the military route. The result? 2 years of humiliating territorial losses, culminating in the fall of Goma. So, what now? By taking Goma, M23 has passed the point of no return. Remaining outside the city's walls might have actually kept them under the global radar. But by capturing Goma, M23 have made their presence undeniable, declaring, "We are here, we will not be ignored." Now, they stand at a crossroads. If they are forced out of Goma under military or diplomatic pressure, they risk losing all the territories they previously held and probably being expelled. They'll end up being expelled from the DRC altogether. They'll probably be denied recognition as Congolese citizens, and they'll probably become homeless forever. Now, for us Rwandans, this will leave a dangerous, well-armed coalition poised at our very border, ready to export their violence into our territory. We saw that when all of a sudden the residents of Rubavu were being shelled. Let's not forget, 15 of our citizens, of Rwandan citizens, lost their lives needlessly. Now, for other Congolese communities, M23's defeat will mean a continuation of the status quo, a slow descent into despair as political leaders in Kinshasa enrich themselves, selling the country's resources to the highest bidders. Now, on the other hand, if the M23 holds its ground, direct negotiations with the government will become inevitable. Such talks could pave the way for a new positive social, political, and economic dispensation in the DRC. Refugees might return to their birthplace, and foreign armed groups like the FDLR and the ADF could be expelled from the Congolese soil. That sounds amazing. Now, of course, this outcome will come at a cost. The question is whether the M23 is ready and willing to pay that price. I certainly hope they are. And lastly, Trump. I don't know if he's lost his mind or if he's like an absolute genius. In less than 100 days that he's been president, he has dismantled the USAID. He's sworn to turn Gaza into a beach resort. Now, don't ask me where he plans to send the millions of Palestinians who call the Gaza Strip home. He started a trade war with China. He's threatened to annex Greenland and Panama and told the Ukrainians that Russia will get to keep part of their territory as part of any eventual peace settlement. And as I watch it all unfold on TV, I can't help but ask myself, are we actually witnessing the fall of the Western liberal order? Here's what I mean. Before the victory of the Allied forces over Hitler's Germany in 1945, there wasn't what I would call an international system. Yes, there were alliances between nations, but truth be told, back then, might was right. If you were strong, you got away with all sorts of things, hence colonialism and all that nonsense. When the Nazis, the Italians, and the Japanese were defeated, the victors mapped out how the world would be governed. They designed a system that ensured that the victorious West would remain at the top of the global pecking order. Think about it. It was at the end of the Second World War that the UN, with its powerful Security Council dominated by the Americans and their allies, the French and the British, were created. The same goes for the World Bank and the IMF. For 80 years, the system that the Americans built to maintain their global dominance largely worked, despite a few hiccups along the way. Why? Because the West, comprising the US, Canada, Japan, and members of the European Union, remained a united front against all rivals. However, this unity was based on the Americans caring enough to share the spoils with the rest of their liberal coalition. And for 80 years, they did. They shared the world like a pie. That is, until Trump entered the White House for a second time. Now, Trump is single-handedly tearing apart that entire Western model that was created 80 years ago. He has threatened Canada, America's literal little brother, with heavy tariffs. He has floated the idea of annexing Greenland, a territory that belongs to Denmark. Mind you, Denmark, that is even a member of NATO. Denmark, that is a member of the EU. He has refused to help Ukraine against the evil Russians. And not only that, he has also sanctioned the International Criminal Court and withdrawn the United States from the UN's Human Rights Council. His creed? Put America first. So this raises two critical questions. If the Western order is collapsing, what will replace it? And more importantly for me, where does that leave Rwanda? I believe we're heading back to a world that resembled the 1800s, a world made up of alliances driven not by shared values, but by cold, hard cash. Countries that can organize themselves effectively will find their place in this new reality. Those that can't will be swallowed up with no powerful daddy to save them from themselves. Now, if you've been paying attention to Rwanda's foreign policy in the recent years, it's clear that the country has been preparing for this shift. Just look at the nations its diplomats have been working to build ties with. Countries like Qatar, Azerbaijan, Jordan, Brazil, Estonia, Indonesia, and Turkey. Those are not the places that we used to go and look for global diplomatic ties. But of course, at the same time, Rwanda hasn't ignored the usual global powers. But by diversifying its alliances, Rwanda has made itself far less vulnerable to the old bullies while cultivating new partners willing to engage with it as a quasi-equal partner. And that's a good thing, because in this new world, you either eat or get eaten. I know which side of that equation I want us to be on. I'd rather be sitting around the table than being the dinner. And that's a wrap for this year's very first episode. Thank you so much for making it to the very end. Remember to follow us on our social media and to make sure to check out our other podcast, The Long Form with Sanny Ntayombya. It comes out every Monday like clockwork. Hope to have you back next Friday. Have a great weekend.